Hello, everyone, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. So, over to the guys.
Hello, and welcome to another Conversations in Time podcast. I'm John N.
And I'm in G.
So today's episode is very special. We have a guest who is an actual our first time author, published author, as a guest, Miles Spencer. Say hello, Miles.
Hello, guys.
So, do you want to give us a... I thought you were going to say this, Ian. So,
Well, we can edit that, but okay, no, I'll say that. So, Miles, I was wondering if you could give us a bit of your background, what your drivers are, what your experience in life is, and why you wrote this particular book.
Sure thing, guys. I guess I'm a curious kid from Midwestern Pennsylvania that never really grew up. By way of background, my great-great-great-grandfather was thrown out of England. He was the second son, so he ended up with a little bit of forest in central Pennsylvania, and he had piddled that down to a small strip coal mine by the time my grandfather came along. Since we're going way back in history, my grandfather was the 23rd of 24 kids, and so things were a little tough around the dinner table. But when he was 4 years old, his father passed away at 74 after having 24 kids, by the way. Most people ask about the moms, but there were three of those.
Oh, so it wasn't.
I was going to say, yeah.
That would have been tough. Yeah.
So that was my namesake, Miles Spencer, and he worked in a coal mine from the time he was 4 to 15 years old, and then there was a little war that broke out over on your side of the pond. So I figured it's a nice way to get to see Europe. He had a pair of boots and a backpack and a rifle. He was a rifleman in the First Army under Pershing, basically a sniper. And he lived, but left a couple of limbs back in France.
Really?
Came back. He had Purple Heart. Yeah. Had a big family of just 12 instead of 24. That was my father, and I was one of 4. So I grew up in Midwestern Pennsylvania. Basically American football player and baseball player. I was lucky enough to come east, mostly based on my athletics, certainly not based on my good looks or my academics. And began a career in finance where I've, for the last 30 years, been founding, investing in, building, and luckily selling 3 digital media businesses, about 1,100 employees. But I also feel that part of that growth process is a balance that includes white space, doing other things. And one of those happens to be painting. One of those happens to be cooking. But one that has really given me a lot of joy has been writing. I did write a book 30 years ago when I hosted a television show called Money Hunt, where entrepreneurs came on, pitched their ideas, and gave them thumbs up or thumbs down on a Shark Tank. But 10 years ago, or let's say 15, a good friend and fellow adventurer and very curious guy as well, Wells Jones, had come through town. And this was a little bit after 9/11. We're just trying to figure out what, who, why, when, where did these guys come from? And we really were at a loss for answers until we came across a book called 7 Pillars of Wisdom by T.E. Lawrence. And I had just completed it. I asked Wells, what are you reading? He said, 7 Pillars of Wisdom. And I asked, what did you think about Lawrence? He said, I think he's the one guy, the one Westerner that really understands the Bedouin mentality of the middle. And he's the one guy who's expressed it decently in the West. And so we shrugged our shoulders and said, well, what's the next step? Let's go.
So out of curiosity, the 7 Pillars of Wisdom, and was it a readable book? Was it a heavy tome, shall we say, or was it a page turner? I mean, was it easy to get through? Because I've tried reading some older books like Moby Dick and stuff, and I've just given up on them because I can't read them. You can't read them like you can read a normal book. They're written in the time. How did you find 7 Pillars of Wisdom?
It was definitely written for the time. I definitely had like a thirst and curiosity for wanting to get through it. Right. But I find Lawrence's writing lyrical, beautiful, sophisticated, witty, informed, it holds up 100 years
Yeah.
later
Okay.
as
All right.
literary, as as a literary work, let
Yeah.
alone the military importance, the strategic importance, etc.
Yeah.
So I'd rate it pretty high. You also have the benefit of a fantastic book alongside, movie alongside of it.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
is Lawrence of Arabia, loosely based on story. That helps.
Yeah.
And so, yes, I'd say it more than held my attention, and I've read it more than one time.
Yeah, we were going to wonder. We were actually wondering if you'd, well, obviously you'd seen the film, but how much of an influence the film had made on you as well. I mean, I must have seen the film a dozen times. I mean, but I've seen many films a dozen times as well. But it is an impressive film. I mean, basically, I think it had a renaissance with large screen televisions, because it really should be seen at a cinema or a theatre. But having it on a large screen helps as well. But we can get into that a bit later. No, it's interesting. I mean, I guess Seven Pillars of Wisdom wouldn't be a book you'd pick up in an airport bookstore, would it? But it's, as you say, if you've got a passion to finish it, you will get through it. I mean, I've not read it myself. I am aware of it, but it's interesting.
It is. Look, we were on a quest, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Wells, my co-author, and I like to create adventures with purpose. And by that, it's not just climbing a peak, personal best. Hey, I got to 20,000 feet, etc. It's really bringing something home that others can learn from. So we look for those type of adventures. There's a wonderful book by John Mack that I actually read before Seven Pillars. It's called The Prince of Our Disorder. Wonderful. It's about yay thick. Watch out.
Yeah.
But it is a psychological profile of Lawrence. And so I felt I had to read that before I read Seven Pillars, and that definitely helped. So, that's 1,000 pages of reading between the two.
Yeah.
But Mac, getting inside of Lawrence's head the way Mac did, was definitely a great way to start. I don't even know if it's in print anymore. It's worth finding an old, and it was great reading. It's still on my book.
Okay. I mean, one thing I'm aware of, I don't think we've actually mentioned the name of your book, which is a line in the sand.
That's right. Yeah, that's my mistake.
I mean, it's an interesting title. Why did you? I mean, without guessing, why did you use that title for your book?
Well, I can give you 5 reasons.
Yeah.
I guess the first one is this existential point that anyone that draws a line in the sand supposedly is issuing a challenge or creating a border or a boundary, right? But if you ever been in a desert, you ever seen sand, boy, those lines move back and forth from the wind and everything else going on. So they aren't as permanent as people would hope. There's an agreement called Sykes-Picot.
Yeah.
British and French negotiators decided that they ought to draw the lines in the sand of how they would divvy up, like cake, the Middle East post-World War I. Of course, they did this sitting in clubs in London and Paris, not in actually being on the ground. And so the difference between their perception of lines on a map, there's a line between Jordan and Saudi Arabia that's about, kilometers here, it's about 1,000 kilometers or 850 miles long straight.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean,
Right?
It's funny you mention that, because we were looking at a series of contemporary maps today and from the 1920s. And you're absolutely, Jordan's actually, I had Jordan's a relatively small country, the the east bank of the River Jordan. But when you look at it, you're right. There's these sort of square bits that somebody just drew, and
Well,
I guess there's nobody there. Sorry, go on.
The interesting thing about those lines is that, and we've been there, we've seen this in action. They literally go through Bedouin territory, the desert tribal people, and put certain families on one side of a line that no longer have access to water on the other side of said line drawn in England.
Yeah.
Right. And they've had that water for 500 years. They fight over that water. They kill for that water. And now it's in another country. Right. So part of it is perhaps the bizarre hubris of thinking that two men that had never actually been to the Middle East could draw lines and create boundaries and borders, which of course divided people, but also divided religion and also divided the water, but most importantly, divided the petroleum resource. That be very, very interesting after Churchill decided that the British Navy would prosper changing its ships from coal, which wasn't all over the world, to petroleum. That he did as vice chairman of the Admiralty early on. And so sources of oil around the world became very, very important.
Yeah.
The Brits just picked the wrong horse to back, right? I mean, the first place they started to find it was Persia at the time.
Yeah.
The big stuff was in Saudi Arabia. By then, there was a different team on it. That was the American. So lines in the sand, frankly, they're a big geopolitical joke.
Yeah.
And they have created the disorder that continues to this day.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, we're going to look at some of the what ifs later on. So I've got a question around that. We'll park it for a second. But doing a bit more service to your book. I mean,
so I was just going to ask, how much of the book did you write, and how much did Wells write? I mean, how did it work as a partnership in that sense?
Sure. I'm the wild storyteller that can rip a fantastic yarn as long as you don't ruin it with facts. Ergo the historical fiction. So give me a beer and a campfire, and I'm a dangerous man. So I go out there on the arc of the story, and I typically write a couple thousand words a day when I'm rolling. And then Mr. Jones follows behind with the, we'd never say that. We'd never do that. The reader isn't going to buy that, et cetera, et cetera. I will say that 9 out of 10 of the times that a critic or a reviewer says that would never happen is something that actually did happen. True, stranger than fiction.
Well, indeed, yeah. I mean, one of the aspects that came through was that, I mean, it wasn't a thread through a book, but something that we picked up on was the sort of the one of the characters that expresses surprise that Islam is based on some, and I get the word right, Abrahamic, or the book of Abraham from the Old Testament. So were you trying to educate people there, or a particular core of your readership perhaps who weren't aware that there was the common book? So these people are the Islam comes from a core of the same Judaic thread, maybe not Christian, because obviously it started to diverge then. But was that something you were trying to educate people with, or was it just a throwaway remark? Or
good Lord, yes. So as a Midwestern Christian, born and raised, it's us and then the rest of the world type of point of view. I probably didn't meet a Muslim until I moved east and I was a teenager. I probably met 1 or 2 Jewish families when I was in Pittsburgh, but very few. So my early years were just like us and the rest of them.
Yeah.
Right. And fast forward to Maggid al-Sheab, chapter 5 in the book, and our guide is very excited about this archaeological dig. It's right on the southern, it's on the northern part of Saudi Arabia, just south of the Jordanian border, which we were speaking about. And they believe that he starts into a story. Ibrahim is here and he does this with in this area, and then there was Musa, and there was Hagar, and there was Israel, and gosh, these names sound really familiar. Where do you get your stories? From the Quran. It's like, well, 10 out of 10, I'm getting them all from the Bible. What are you doing with the same stories in the same place in the same desert? And then it hit me, and we called a buddy in Jerusalem and said, I'm going to name 10 prophets. Tell me how many you got in your book. And we went 10 for 10. And we came to this realization that when it comes to religion and the accords that were almost signed, but they were fully negotiated by Kushner. But it was basically, they're called the Abraham Accords.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
It was Saudi, Egypt, Jordan, and Israel all signing up for a more or less of a make peace deal, putting one group as the odd man out, and they responded on October 7th.
Yeah.
So it was an epiphany that not only were there other religions hanging around, they all came from the desert and they all borrowed the same prophets. Our common elements are as much more prevalent than our differences. That was an eye-opener to me, and probably an eye-opener to a lot of people in the U.S.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's I think it's known reasonably well amongst educated people, but it's how you define educated people, isn't it? I mean, now
we're talking about the diploma divide. Okay. Yesterday, if you watched our great ceremony, the passing of power, this one peaceful, that look, many of the people that made a difference in that election do not have college diplomas.
No, indeed.
So there you go.
I think. Yeah. I mean, the most common, I think, is Jesus. Jesus was. Many people know that Jesus is a prophet in Islam. Whether they know all the way back to Abraham and what have you is the other thing, isn't it? But so that was a specific or a deliberate decision on your part to try and weave this into the book, and not as a major thread perhaps, but weave it into the book and say, look, this is a fact. The common cultural references.
Yeah, it's so interesting that you would refer to it as common, which I believe on a global basis here on planet Earth, it is common.
Yeah. And
perhaps in the last couple of years, it's become more common. But again, if you look at the crowd on January 20th and a significant portion of the American population and where my father and grandfather and great-grandfather came from, that story is surreal. And what's beautiful about it is Wells and I experienced it ourselves. It's in the book as historical fiction, as are many of the other elements in the book. It's not just research. It's on the ground things that we saw and observed.
Okay.
Yeah. I mean, it's funny because it did stand out, or it did to me anyway, that particular bit. But I mean, ultimately, we were a bit surprised because it wasn't something that was a surprise to us, if you know what I mean. I suppose, the UK, over the years has been a multi-ethnic society for a long time. And it was almost like, well, I'm sure we talked about this at school,
That warms my heart, man. Actually, John, it actually, it's nice to hear. It really is. But has not been that way in America, in my mind. And we felt, again, adventures with purpose. It was one of many things that we could show people by entertaining them first, something that just is.
Yeah. So just another detail about the book then, and I don't want to go into too much details and spoil it for anybody, but the introduction or the beginning isn't set in the Middle East; it's set in Spain. I mean, was that you did that journey in the Middle East? I'm assuming that the journey in Spain wasn't, actually part of the journey into the Middle East. It's either something that you've conceived or you actually did that, but at some other time.
Wells and I rammed the bulls in Pamplona, and experienced it in that excruciating detail.
Yeah.
It was originally a very short bit. We originally began the book in Oxford in the scene in which Jeremy and the two characters, Magnus, based on me, Wells, based on, Finn, which is based on Wells, meet in the bar in Oxford, right? And the reason for meeting in the bar in Oxford was, oh yeah, we got together in Pamplona. And thank God we had some early editors that read it and said, you could probably give a little bit more to Running with the Bulls in Pamplona.
Yeah.
So we made it a prologue. It was a nice way to incorporate Jeremy and his personality and sensitivities versus ours, right? I mean, he's half our age. He is a real person, by the way. So yes, we've done Pamplona, been to Oxford plenty of times, been to the Ashmolean, been to the pubs, been to London, obviously my share. But there's a lot that we wanted to lay pipe for with Lawrence, with the Knights Templar, with the Crusades. And so there are several places along the way, not just Oxford and his education and his original recruitment by Hogarth from the Ashmolean. We wanted to lay that pipe before discovering him. And so we did that by way of our journey from Pamplona to Oxford to London to Paris before heading to Beirut.
Who came up with the idea of the dagger as the tool?
Well, as you know, Lawrence had a favorite, right? We did bounce around as to, we want something that's portable. Remember, it fits in a rucksack. They're walking around with the rucksack all the time. So it can't be the time machine used by Marty McFly in Back to the Future. Big. So that was impractical. It was a wonderful time travel in Midnight in Paris with Owen Wilson. He just gets into a stagecoach, which I just love that movie. But it's an effective way to go back in time and see, live things historically. And so there was precedent for interesting characters bopping back and forth between periods. And we just felt that was the best way for us to personally experience history rather than just telling about it. And so it was definitely looking at Lawrence's portraits.
Yes, I can visualize the Arabic dagger. Certainly from the film, it's got
a jambaya, and he was
that's the word.
Him as a ceremonial accoutrement to his garb, and boy, he loved it. And so started playing with that a little bit and said, that would fit that one of those in a rucksack. Yeah, and it'll look interesting enough so that it could just be an artifact, but as you know, it's got a little bit of special powers in the handle. So
correct me if I'm wrong. You didn't go into you didn't go into detail as to how it could possibly work, did you? And was that a deliberate decision?
It's we've filed a patent on it. We've not heard back yet.
Pending, as they say, but okay.
Pending. Yeah. It is pending that we have a problem with. You have to have commercial use. So it may be rejected, but it was great fun. We did think through how would this work, where would we put it, and we also didn't want to overdo it.
No.
So I guess it's interesting. It corresponds to things that we see in the Rhodes door it's actually at Versailles. It's not at the Cluny Museum. But we didn't want to go all the way out to the country. So I believe the Rhodes door had been at the Cluny Museum one time. It's now at Versailles. But some of the inscriptions on that door corresponded to the handle of the dagger. And so that was important to pull in. But we didn't spend much time on the mechanics of it besides it works.
Right. It's fair.
If you put the right date on, it works.
Well, that's right. I mean, it would have been a whole other book, wouldn't it, if you delved into that. I mean, so just looking at the book and moving on a wee bit in terms of some of the what is the purpose of our podcast? I mean, what do you think about the proposals that Lawrence had in 1918, 1919, and also talked about? Do you think they were practical? What do you think fallout with them could have been? I mean, there is something. I'm going to say it now. It'll be a follow-on question. Unless I'm wrong, there's a glaring omission that he wasn't aware of, or it was less of an issue, shall we say, that which is the Jewish question. There you go. I've just given it away. So was he aware of the Jewish question? It was much less of an issue as it became in 1945, 47, obviously. But what did he think of that? Do you think his maps, if you like, his views would have been any better or more stable? Or
so I'm just going to interrupt us there and say we're going to take Miles can have a quick think, and we're going to take a quick break for a word from our sponsors.
Tired of wrinkly, rebellious shoelaces ruining your style? Then fret no more. Here at OTech know, we've got you covered. Yes, Steamyo shoelaces. The world's first battery-operated steam iron designed exclusively for your laces. It's no 2-bit piece of tat this. And hey presto, you'll be steaming in no time. Say goodbye to twisted, tangled, and downright messy shoelaces. Steamyo shoelaces fits nice and snug in your pocket or purse. You can steam your laces anytime, anywhere. On the bus, you betcha. At the office, easy peasy, even mid-hike. Just whip it out, click the 2 bits together, and ding! Now that's cool. Perfect laces in seconds. No more fumbling with frumpy footwear. Keep your laces crisp and your confidence high. Steamyo shoelaces, because your laces deserve a spa treatment too. Available now in 17 stylish colors. Get yours today! Shoelaces not included. Batteries sold separately. Steamyo shoelaces, for the laces in yo shoe.
Today's episode is sponsored by OTechno, helping yesterday, today. OTechno is a subsidiary of Uncle Schnookums Enterprises, wholly owned and operated by Deforest Co. Global, pioneers in transforming the world's rainforests into your favorite products. All rights reserved. No claims or returns will be honored.
And we're back.
Right. So, Marms, we were just saying, Lawrence's views on the Middle East, he put into words, into maps. How do you think that would have panned out?
Well, now we're working in a parallel dimension, obviously.
Indeed.
Because it didn't. But when I look at playing geopolitical master 100 years ago, I hope my first choice would have been, let's listen to a guy who's been on the ground, knows the languages, knows the people, knows the tribes. He probably did not know about the petroleum reserves. He definitely knew at some point about Sykes-Picot, and the fact that he'd been sold down the river, or at least his compadre Faisal had been sold down the river. But remember, he was a Brit from Oxford, a talented linguist who was a cartographer at first. He's drawing maps. He really draws beautiful maps, by the way. I mean, if you've seen his work, they're fantastic. I mean, he's basically there as a spy to basically map things. So that once they rolled in, they knew where the heck the mountains were. But the maps he drew, and they are, last I saw, in his exhibit in the Imperial War Museum, unfortunate name, but the maps he drew were based on tribal unity, not on something else like, gosh, we lost 1 million people in the trenches, so we ought to have some part of the Levant, even though we've never set foot there, right?
Yeah.
So first, I would have hoped I would have listened to the likes of Lawrence and Gertrude Bell and some of the others that were on the ground and knew it well, right? So that would be first and foremost in that parallel dimension. The second part of that parallel dimension was promises made and promises broken. I mean, Lawrence was sent to the Hejaz, the Hashemite kingdom that include Mecca and Medina, in which the family, the Husseins, now on the throne of Jordan only, but they did control that part of the peninsula at the time before Saud rolled in. And he recruited them, and he united all of the tribes on the promise that if you get to Damascus first, you will have a pan-Arab state on which you'll sit the crown. course, they did get to Damascus more or less first, and Allenby was waiting there for him. And Allenby said, more or less, according to the movie and according to my research, hey, I'm a military man. You can fly a flag over the power station, but I'm turning this over to the politicians in a week or two, and you'll have to work with them. So Lawrence kept his end of the bargain, or his understanding of British asking the Arabs to revolt against the Ottomans and help out, and this was the reward. Third part of your question, did Lawrence know of the Jewish question? This is the Balfour Agreement, definitely. Sykes-Picot, probably. There is a letter called the Faisal-Weizmann Agreement, Accord letter, call it what you will. They meet in Aqaba in the tent of an American, Lowell Thomas. And in it, they discuss this future in which Faisal looks as if he's going to be ruling this large, consolidated Arab kingdom. They always got along with the Jews. He had no problem with Palestine as a Jewish homeland. And this letter contains exactly that. It is signed by Weizmann and Faisal and Thomas as a witness. And Lawrence is in that tent. This is in the book.
Yeah.
It is historical fiction. It is based on our research. And it includes one codicil added by the very adept Lawrence, signed by Faisal. All of this kumbaya, around the campfire, roasting marshmallows, getting along in the Middle East stuff, assumes that the British promises are kept. And if I get what I've been promised, you can have what I promised to you. However, if the promises aren't true, given to me, neither are those that I give to you.
Yeah.
That was an eye-opener to me, geopolitically, much the way that the religious eye-opener happened to in a prior chapter. And, the reality was these people did get along okay until, obviously, the world changed. There were the pogroms in Russia that pushed Jews out of Russia. It certainly accelerated during Nazi Germany.
Yeah.
And you had the question of what's the best homeland. You understand that homelands were offered in Africa, Southeast Asia, and Oklahoma.
Yeah.
And there was an awful lot of the not in my backyard attitude from the global powers. And this, at one moment, seemed like the best solution. And I think it probably, in a historical context, resonates. It's just the way it was done, right? I mean, sometimes I have people that are dear to me and they deliver messages to me and they are the truth and it probably is the way things should be, but the delivery is lacking.
Yeah. I mean, I guess as well, I mean, it's interesting to speculate on Faisal's opinion. I'm not sure if he was even alive in 47, but the existing Jewish population of Palestine had probably been floating around the Middle East for hundreds of years and had a historical claim. But the Jews from Europe, which I believe are called Ashkenazi, which obviously were survivors of the Holocaust, they turned up, and what the Arabs made of them, I guess, was different from some of the farmers they dealt with before, who'd been there. So you can envisage that I get along with my neighbor. Yes, we have disputes, and yes, there were raids and stuff. But when suddenly an extra million people turn up, as we've seen all over the world, it's different, isn't it? Even if they're the same as the people that are there already, it's numbers sometimes, isn't it?
It's a little much. My understanding was that we started with an area, let's loosely say Palestine, that roughly had a little less than 1 million people, of which 80% were Muslim.
Yeah.
Then 5, maybe 10 years, less than a generation, it had flipped the other way.
Yeah.
And as you say, many of them were of the same religion, but a very different culture.
Well, even today, those divisions are in modern Israel, aren't they? There's people who believe they should serve in the army because their religion doesn't allow it, but they're Jewish, but they'll happily have somebody else in the army, defending them. So it's an interesting part of the world. It's just a shame. It's such a tragedy as well, isn't it? So. And what do you think? I mean, this is jumping well ahead. What do you think Lawrence would have made of the State of Israel in 1947, or the creation of the State of Israel? Would he have seen it as a great sort of sweep of history and them coming from the original place, or would he found it a betrayal?
Yeah, or a mistake, or whatever.
Yeah.
I believe he would have cried.
Yeah.
Many tears filled up the Mediterranean.
Yeah.
He obviously had an affinity for the Arabs and the Arab culture, to the point of a dedication in his book. You can read it and draw your own conclusions, degree of affinity. But I don't think he in his mind may have separated a Jewish or a Muslim.
Oh, interesting. Yeah.
In that, so when you talk about Arabs, it's this phrase anti-Semitic, right? I mean, the Sumerians include Jews and Arabs, right? So I always get a kick out of that one. Speculation, but I believe since he created or helped to create that document with Faisal and Weizmann in Aqaba, he probably thought of Arabs having at least two, perhaps three religions. I know Christians born and raised in Israel. I know Muslims born and raised in Israel who have Israeli state documents but can't go to Mecca to worship because they have an Israeli passport.
Yeah.
Or citizenship card. And so I'm going to go with this speculation. I believe he would have thought that Arabs included three religions, one culture, right? And look, immigration is a pretty hot topic. It certainly was yesterday. And
yes, indeed.
Right? People are moving around. And I'll speak for America here on this podcast. Every American wave that comes, right? Like, the Irish come after the potato famine, and they don't want the Italians to come because they're already here and they don't want the new ones. So I think it's very much like whoever's the latest person to be on the immigration wheel.
Oh, absolutely. It's
right? They're like, we're all immigrants here.
Yeah, I have this joke with my wife so I'm a Celt. So I'm an original inhabitant of the British Isles. My wife, and all due respect to John, they're Anglo-Saxons. So in reality, I'm probably an Anglo-Saxon as well, but that's a by the by. But because you've only been here 1,500 years, I've been here 2,000 years. So it's when you start boiling it down, it's a splitting of hairs, and it's patent nonsense, isn't it? It is very strange. I mean, that's not to say that there aren't reasons why you can't just let tens of thousands of people turn up in a town and that can't support them, etc., etc. But yeah.
So
Ian, I just want to top it off with this.
Yeah.
And not a spoiler, but the final page of the book includes some notes taken in a hotel room in Paris during the Paris Peace Conference. And there's some people in that room that, frankly, really should have been the architects of the lines in the sand: Gertrude Bell, Lawrence, Faisal. And one of the 5 notes that emerge is people have to live somewhere.
Yeah.
Just that simple concept. People have to live somewhere. They have to live, and they have to live somewhere.
Yeah.
Food and shelter. But just that simple premise seems to be really, really hard to accommodate in that corner of the world.
Absolutely. Yeah. So just on another counterfactual tack, just as a quickie, what do you think Lawrence's influence was? So if he wasn't there, think of him not being in the Middle East during that time period, what do you think would have happened within that timeline? How much of an influence did he have?
Well, I love these parallel dimensions. So he was. There were several efforts, by the way, to recruit tribes in the Hijaz to revolt against the Ottoman Turks around World War I, right? And no one had succeeded. No one had even come close. So let's assume Lawrence never shows up in the Hijaz. He was based in Cairo at the time, drawing maps, by the way. And so I don't think the Arabs would have ever been united against the Turks. Would the Ottoman Empire have fallen anyways? I'm going to say not immediately, right? They would have rode that one to the end. So you end World War I in Europe, but some offshoot of it continues in the Middle East. And then shortly thereafter, Saud consolidates the peninsula and oil is discovered. All hell breaks loose.
Yeah,
for sure. And so would we all be on solar power and headed to Mars sooner? that may have sped up history by 100 years because that place would have been on fire without.
So you consider he's had a major impact? I mean, which, I think is true. I mean, this is the basis of what we do on our podcast, is where we postulate these alternatives and then, sit back and think, geez, that's, some people are quite significant in world history.
Yeah, the interesting thing about him having a major impact is I think that's indisputable. The question is, had it not been for the film, would we be having this conversation? Would people even know who Lawrence was without the film?
No,
I agree. I mean, the film is timeless.
Moving image.
Yeah. The movie, as you would call them for our American friends. Yeah,
that's film, right. Movies. Yeah. Now, frankly, now it's the feed, right? I mean, there's a major debate going on in the U.S. about the influence of ByteDance owning TikTok and TikTok, 170 million users in the U.S. and basically, the massive distraction. That is video. And until 3D and holographic images really become prevalent the way video is today, I'm going to give it another 20 years, then no, to your point, I don't think the written word would have got us this far.
No, it's interesting. I mean, because there are people out there in history that have had impacts equivalent to Lawrence, and unless you got the odd podcast or the odd book, nobody's heard of them. I mean, I don't mean literally nobody's heard of them, but they sit in academia and they haven't broken through. I think Lawrence broke through. The question is, did he break through because of Lawrence, or did he break through because of, and the actor's name gone straight off my head,
Peter O'Toole.
And did Peter O'Toole, the actor who betrayed him in the film, and the other famous actors, Omar Sharif and all the rest of them, had it not been for them, it's these branches in time, where things happened, but the impact of them aren't known of until somebody makes a movie about them. It's quite bizarre when you think about it.
I think David Lean did a great service to the rest of the world by helping the rest of the world be curious and ultimately understand a bit about that region. And again, Wells and I, through our book, which is no Lawrence of Arabia movie, I will admit, but we seek to entertain first and then inform. And it's very humbling to read reviews. But one comment that comes out frequently is, I didn't know I was getting a history lesson here. I was just rolling along with this great story. And I got to the end, and as my father and grandfather would say in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh, gosh, I did not know that. That was always my acid test in writing, was could I get that reaction out of my father and grandfather?
Yeah, well, it's hard to beat that, really, isn't it?
So what
are you working on now then? Let's get near the end of the pod, but what's new on the agenda? for you, Miles?
Well, you may not be surprised to know that Magnus and Finn are back.
Okay.
They've been to Havana, which again has like these imperial implications, white men behaving badly, imperial gaze. This was not so much about oil as geopolitical location. It was a delicious little island that a lot of countries coveted, whether that's Spain or Venezuela or former USSR, Soviets, and even the mob, who had a fantastic gambling operation there. So Magnus and Finn, based on personal experience, have a rip-roaring adventure. It is called Havana Familia, and it's due out in the spring. And
So what's the time? Is it Cuban Missile Crisis? Is it the American-Spanish War? What is it? Is it the Spanish conquest? Is it all three? I mean,
it's New Year's 1958, baby.
Okay, so it's Batista and
it is midnight. It's midnight at the Oasis. It is the best of times. It's Sinatra and Eartha Kitt. It's Batista. It's Castro.
Bear Pigs. Yeah.
The whole gang. And then it's also based on my experience there during the thaw that Obama initiated. The thaw that Obama initiated during 2015-16 at the end of history.
Wasn't it? It was relatively difficult for American citizens to go to Cuba until relatively recently. Is that true? Could you travel?
Until that moment,
right. Okay. Yeah.
It was a real pain. There was 18 months where it was all back again.
Yeah.
And then, as you may recall, there was some issues with these sonar guns and concussion.
Yes. Yeah.
There is a Florida politician who is now in the current administration that definitely wanted some Cuba expat votes from Miami. And
is that Rubio by any chance?
May well be.
Okay.
And they shut it down pretty quickly. And since then, Cuba is on its last legs.
Yeah.
There is an existential crisis coming in Havana, just around the corner.
So Americans don't travel to Cuba anymore. Is that?
They can.
Yeah.
At this point, there's barely any reason to.
Well, but it used to be. I mean, I know people have been to Cuba on holiday. You know, and it's and they enjoyed it. You know, it's surprising that vast, population of America doesn't tap into it. I mean, there's plenty of other places to go to, I guess, but it's. All the classic tropes of the 1950s cars and the rum and the cigars and stuff. You think it's an ideal place, but being held back.
Well, it was. I think we got a century worth of pleasure out of it. So there's more story coming in our geopolitical world in Cuba. I assure you, and. Our book, again, may be able to, through Magnus and Finn, and historical fiction and a time travel device, be able to entertain, but also teach some history of something that's right in our back door.
Yeah. Sounds like you found a format that you're very comfortable with, And
we absolutely have. We have a couple other areas of the world on the planning. Hey, look, the theme of white men behaving badly in clubs and drawing colonial lines in the sand can be played in many parts of the world.
Oh, yeah. It's not just a British thing.
It's a middle-aged white man.
So just give us the name of that book again. Sorry, Havana, what was it? For our listeners?
That's going to be Havana Familia, but it is not the Spanish version of the word. It is with a G. Because the family that controlled, they used a G, so it is Havana Familia and Be Out in the Spring.
And when's that being published? Have you got a published date? Springtime. Springtime this year, 2025.
And the tulips are coming up in America.
Right.
You get them in London or Europe.
Well, generally, if it's an Amazon,
it'll be on Amazon. Yeah.
Amazon's, So I mean, certainly all good bookstores and even bad bookstores, as they say. It's no doubt. Okay. Good.
I'll look out for that. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
Or maybe we can have you back afterwards to discuss that one, because I'm aware that some people do podcasts not having read or seen some of the articles they're actually discussing. But John and I did read. John did an Audible version, and I read it on my Kindle. So
Audible is my favorite. I think Eduardo Ballerini.
He did a great job. Yeah.
The same words, twice as deliciously sounding as the written one.
Although I would say there were a couple of times when he put on an English accent and said a word in English which we wouldn't pronounce that way, but I'll let him off.
Oh yeah, well, he had a lot of characters and a lot of words, and it is a bit of a patois or a portmanteau of a lot of different things. But for the broad audience, it's very, very popular, and we'll probably do that again for the next book. But yes, John, we do feel like we have a format. We have a lot of stories to tell, and so we're going to crank them out. We'd love to be on your podcast again to talk about Havana Familia.
100%.
But this today is about a line in the sand.
Indeed.
That's
So
right, yeah.
just in case our listeners, or I'm sure they will want to follow you more, Miles, where can they find you in the internet, web, social media, etc.? What are your handles?
MilesSpencer.com is a pretty robust platform for me. So that's just my personal blog, and these and other podcasts are there, as well as my writing and my videos, etc. I tend to use LinkedIn an awful lot.
Yeah.
I use Instagram, same name, for my artwork, which again is some bizarre white space in which I surrender to the to the powers of the universe, because man, the colors go all over the place, but it's fun. And a little bit on X, Miles Spencer, but you can do most of that through my website. And then, of course, the book is available on Amazon and Audible, and that's where we run all of our promotion and marketing.
Excellent. Well, certainly recommend it to our listeners.
A Line in the Sand by Miles Spencer. Oh,
and Wells Jones.
Indeed.
Yeah, let's not forget the co-writer.
Yeah.
Right. Well, that's been really interesting. Thanks for joining us, Miles. Hopefully you've found it reasonably interesting talking to a couple of Brits. But thank you.
Much more than reasonably interesting. Thank you for having me on the podcast and allowing me to talk a little bit about our current book and our future, and a little bit about American and British history as well. It's all great fun.
Thanks a lot. So thanks everybody.
Thanks.
We'll be back with another podcast soon. Bye for now.
Bye.
That's it. Now we know you enjoyed that, or maybe you didn't. But why not let us know what you think? But you can go on Twitter, or X if that's the way you get dressed, and search for ORC_time to find us. On Facebook, simply search for Conversations in Time and leave your thoughts right there.